Interviews with Arizonans.
So one of the things that I find interesting about, kind of the things of current events, if you will, is, I don't remember these school board elections being such a popular and trendy topic. I mean, it's just so many things going on in the country that it seems like, not only parents, but just people in general are getting very involved in these upcoming elections for school boards.
You're absolutely right. It's a completely different ball game than even the last school board election a year ago, 2 years ago. Obviously, hot button issues, parental rights, critical race theory, teaching sex, gender identity has really fired people up. As you said, not just parents, but people all across the community. I do think 20, 30 years from now, when we look back on the influence of COVID, historians will say, obviously, in many ways it was a negative, certainly the loss of 1 million people. But I'm hopeful that one of the benefits that will come out of it will be an improvement in our education system.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everything that you just said seems to overshadow the number one goal of parents, which is just a proper education and passing grades and really having success with the academic system as a whole. So we're going to talk about all of that today. Let's bring everybody into the conversation. Let me welcome Andrea Keck to the podcast. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's start here. Let's let people know who you are. Starting with, we're going to talk about obviously your run for a Scottsdale Unified School District school board. So we'll talk about that really, really important race this year. And we're going to talk about why it's so important for parents really to tune in. But I want people to understand who you are. You're a Scottsdale resident. So let's talk about how you ended up in Scottsdale, how long you've been here, what is your background, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, ironically, it was 25 years ago today that we packed up my Honda Accord, including the Goldfish, in Illinois and drove west to start a new chapter in our life. So we've been in Scottsdale for 25 years.
When you say we, who is we?
My family.
Your family. So
Right.
You have one son?
Well, I married a man. I've been married for 38 years.
Okay.
I married a man who had 2 children, and then we have one son together.
Okay.
So collectively, we have 3 grandchildren in college, and we are expecting another grandchild in November.
Congratulations.
So I have been a parent for 38 years and a grandparent for 24 years.
Great.
That comes up because sometimes, and we may talk about this, but sometimes there's conversation that you, quote, need to be a parent in the district in order to serve on the board.
Sure.
So let's talk about that later.
Yeah.
But, so who am I? I was born and raised in Northern Kentucky. Both of my parents were teachers. So obviously I'm an advocate for teachers. I went to college at Indiana University School of Business, and then I was hired by the Harris Bank in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago, worked for the Harris Bank, and went to night school for 3.5 years while I was working full-time to get my MBA at the University of Chicago. After that, I went to work for one of my clients at the bank. They make the telestrator technology, if you watch football on television.
Okay, yeah.
And they hired me as their director of marketing right before their initial public offering. So that after that, the bulk of my career, corporate career, was spent as a brand manager at both Kraft Foods and the NutraSweet Company. So I ran Parquet Margarine, Lender's Bagels, Celestial Seasonings Tea, 100, 200, $300 million businesses. So I understand how to run a business. And I think that's definitely one of the characteristics that separates me from some of the other candidates in this race. Fundamentally, the Scottsdale Unified School District is a business. We're not in it for money. We're not in it to make money. But nonetheless, the way I look at it, we have 22,000 customers, i.e. students. We have 3,000 plus employees. We have 29 physical school buildings, physical plants, and we have almost a $500 million budget. So you have to understand how to run a big enterprise. So I did that for 15 years. My husband retired, can't play golf in Chicago year-round. As I said, we got in the Honda with the Goldfish and arrived in Scottsdale 25 years ago.
Well, you just clarified for me why so many of my clients are coming from the Chicago area. And I actually just looked at that today. I looked at the Atlas Van Line survey, and a lot of people are coming. Chicago, Phoenix is the #1 destination right now. I just actually looked at that this morning.
Right.
So now I know. Great.
So I'm not a golfer. I mean, my husband's idea of retirement was to play championship level golf 8 days a week. And I'm not a golfer, so when we arrived here, I got very involved in charity work. And I spent the first 8 or 9 years working at the Pappas schools in Central Phoenix. They don't exist anymore, but their entire enrollment consisted of homeless children. 2,500 homeless children cycled through there every year. So I worked, meaning volunteered there, for 8 or 9 years. Then I was on the board of an educational nonprofit in Arizona that also takes under-resourced children. They have 2 programs. One is residential, one is commuter-based. Send them to the best high schools on to college. And then just by observation, watching everyone from homeless children to the most affluent children, I saw a need. And that was that we seem to send a lot of kids to college, number one. And number two, a lot of them end up with what I call major by default. They wander around for 5 years. They don't really know what they want to study. They end up, taking a variety of courses, and they can't get a job when they graduate. So I started my own educational business 11 years ago called Dream Roads, and we offer curriculum for 7th to 12th grade students to help them find their passion, build their strengths, and realize their dreams. So I've had my own educational business for 10 years as well. So I think that the fact that I'm both a business person and I've had 25 years of substantive roles in education. I certainly did all the PTA stuff and the booster club stuff. I was a room mother. I was a picture lady. I was, a field trip chaperone. I did all of that. But because of my business background, particularly at Pappas, I ended up bringing community partnerships in to provide academic enrichment programs there. I put together partnerships between Pappas and a more upscale middle school where we did 7 or 8 joint cultural, academic, athletic events a year. So I've done more than just the typical, as I said, PTA things. I've really dug in and been substantively involved in education for 25 years.
The Dream Roads program, so you're saying that's designed to kind of help kids find their passion so that when they do hit the college level, they have direction? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
So the secret sauce that we had were personal coaches. All right. So we had a curriculum, which first of all just started off with what's your biggest, wildest, craziest dream for yourself. No dream is off the table. Of course, middle school kids, as you know, 1/3 of them want to be pro athletes, 1/3 of them want to be YouTubers, and 1/3 of them, want to be a vet or a, doctor or something like that. So we start with what's your biggest dream. But then we spend an inordinate amount of time on strengths. Everyone has strengths. Some strengths are very visible, like athletic strengths. I have a granddaughter who's incredibly artistic. Some things are very visible. Other strengths are not. Maybe you're a good nurturer. Maybe you're a good negotiator. So, we really concentrate on strengths, and then we go to interest. What are you interested in? Are you interested in baseball? Are you interested in math? Are you interested in... I've had children interested in watches. I've had children interested in birdhouses. And so the most important thing, though, is that they develop a personalized roadmap to follow to realize their goal. It's one thing to say, okay, here's what I want to do, but it's a whole nother... You can't just, there's that old saying, a dream without a plan is just a dream. So they develop a personalized, and of course it changes. It changes over time. What a 7th grader wants is not necessarily what a 10th grader wants to do, is not necessarily what a 12th grader wants to do. But fundamentally, we're teaching the process, a lifelong process of thinking about who am I, what do I do well, what do I like to do, what am I interested in, what kind of lifestyle do I want to live, because you have to, if you want to have 2 homes and fly around on net jets, you have to think about a salary that supports that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because I think that's an area that unfortunately lacks in school. So
I couldn't agree more. I think that there's 2 areas that I see lacking, and you're absolutely right. I don't think there's anything more discouraging for a parent than sending your kids to college with absolutely no direction and then watching them, coming out of college at Starbucks as a barista or something along those lines. So I think you're right. I mean, I think there's 2 areas that are lacking. And it's interesting because we're going to talk about adding curriculum to the education system later. But I think if you were really wanting to add curriculum, you would add, number 1, you would really help these kids try to develop interest like you're talking about. I think the second one is financial literacy and just understanding.
Absolutely.
It blows my mind that these kids aren't learning real world financial principles at the high school level. I just don't get it.
We couldn't be more matched on that. It's one of my pet peeves that you can become a neurosurgeon in our country and never have had a basic course in economics, even household budgeting, why you don't want to run up your credit card bill, why you want to pay it off every month, why, how to balance a checkbook, how to set a budget.
Versus bad debt.
Good debt, versus bad debt, So I couldn't agree with you more. But just to back up for one second, I want to make 2 important points. One follows on what you said, which is students go to college and end up, like I said, with a major by default. Oftentimes what happens is they go to college. First of all, they're not academically prepared, which I know we're going to talk in great detail about. So, but then they don't know what they want to do.
Right.
Meantime, they've taken out $35,000 worth of debt.
Yep.
Okay? So after 2 years, they drop out.
35 is being generous.
Right now, half the student loan debt in our country is held by people who have dropped out of college.
Wow.
That's number 1. The second point is, and I want to be very clear about this, I think we do a great disservice by trying to shove every kid into a 4-year university. Okay? I think we need to culturally make it culturally acceptable like they have in Europe. They have a culture of acceptance of apprenticeships and internships. We need to make it culturally acceptable for someone to say, I want to be a welder. I want to be, a cosmetologist. Let me tell you, given what I pay to have my hair done every month,
Yeah.
I mean, do what, and so again, that feeds into we're sending kids to college who don't,
they don't fit the profile.
They don't need to be there.
Right.
Okay. It's not what they want to do. It doesn't lead them to what they want to do.
Yep.
A recent Georgetown University study, 1/3 of the jobs in our country actually require a 4-year college degree. 1/3 require some kind of post-secondary education, maybe a community college certificate, something like that. 1/3 simply require a high school diploma. So I think that's another thing that we need to work on. I know in Scottsdale Unified School District, they have, a program of career and technical education. They're tied in with EVIT, the East Valley Institute of Technology. They do offer, but I think there's more that we can do in that area.
Yeah, I was the perfect profile of that. Coming out of high school, I had two interests. I loved the idea of owning restaurants or sports bars, and my other interest was real estate. Real estate was the path that I chose, but I ended up in junior college for 2 years, mostly probably because I wanted to continue my limited basketball career. I knew my days were numbered. So I played a couple years of junior college basketball. Then I went to university for 1 year at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. But the entire time, I actually, in the back of my mind, not the entire time. I mean, I went for hotel restaurant management, and I ended up doing an internship at Disney World, and I went into the restaurant business down there. I'm like, this sucks. And the reason was, and maybe it was just the Disney culture, but the restaurant managers at the time, this was in the 90s, they were making, 35, 40,000 a year. The servers were making 60 to 70, and the servers were running the show. Now, it was probably the culture, but it really turned me off to it. And at that point in time, I knew college was no longer for me. And that's when I didn't end up getting my bachelor's. So I spent 3 years in college racking up the debt, and then ended up in the real estate industry anyway. So I was probably a really good profile for somebody that, if I had a little bit more direction in high school and somebody said, hey, you know what, based on your interests, if you're going to go this route, you need to explore it a little bit more, because this could be a great college route. As far as owning restaurants or, becoming a manager so I could eventually own restaurants. And the other route was like, you don't need a degree to sell real estate or be a real estate investor, which was really my interest at that time, was more so on the investment side. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think that a lot of times parents just think, well, the path has to be 4-year college. But, again, the outcomes just don't seem to warrant in many cases. Now, again, if you're a doctor or something, completely different, but a lot of times the outcomes don't warrant that. So let me tell you about Phoenix Homes and Hotspots. This is my real estate YouTube channel, and it's the #1 real estate resource here in the state of Arizona, and here's why. Let's say you want to put your home on the market, and you contact a real estate agent. Most agents are going to do a pretty good job of marketing the home. The challenge is that's where it stops. Phoenix Homes and Hotspots picks up where the average agent left off. We not only do a phenomenal job marketing the home, but we're going to show through video on our YouTube channel, we're going to show the surrounding community, walking trails, community pools, bike paths, golf courses, whatever that might look like running through the community. But then we're also going to show the lifestyle around it. We're going to show all the local hotspots. Where are the best restaurants? Where's the best shopping? Where are you going to get groceries, gas? Where are the best schools located, and how are they rated near that particular community where you found the home you're looking for? So if you think of yourself as an out-of-state buyer moving into the area, they find your home online, they love the home, but they have no idea what the community or the hotspots or the lifestyle around that looks like. We tie it all together. No gimmicks. No, sell your home in X amount of hours. No, we have tens of thousands of buyers waiting to buy your home. This is not gimmicks. This is bulletproof real estate marketing. Also on Phoenix Homes and Hotspots, we talk about the cost of living in the area, pros and cons, and so much more. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube right now, click the top right-hand corner. That will take you to Phoenix Homes and Hotspots to check it out. Or if you're listening on one of the audio platforms, you can look in the description below, or you can go to youtube.com/Phoenix Homes and Hotspots. Check it out. Subscribe, smash the bell next to the subscribe button. That way we can notify you every time we create new popular videos right there on Phoenix Homes and Hotspots. So, there's another thing that you touched on that I wanted to ask you about, because it's another thing that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, which is, you talked about homelessness, and I know on your website you also have a little section in there where you talk about, just underprivileged kids, poverty, minority, maybe homeless, whatever that is. And to me, that's such a big issue, because when I see the things that are happening in the country today, it always leads me back to at some point we have to start taking care of the kids in these communities, because if the kids don't get the education, this poverty, this generational poverty that continues to flow through these families will never end. What do you see? I mean, I know, when we think of Scottsdale Unified School District, we're not really thinking about underprivileged kids. I mean, the people don't think Scottsdale, well, you have a bunch of underprivileged kids there, and that might be the case, but there are underprivileged kids in the Scottsdale Unified School District. How do you view that, and how do you see potentially changing the culture where these kids now have, where they get caught up to speed, where they feel like they actually do have equal opportunities as they develop?
Well, going back to my marketing background, I'm very accustomed to segmenting the market. You have different target audiences, and you offer different programs and services to different target audiences. To the point you made earlier, what a student at Desert Mountain High School needs in the majority of cases is not what a student perhaps at Coronado High School needs. At Coronado, as you probably know, that's where we have our highest level of poverty rate and our highest level of ethnicity, Hispanic and African American students. When I worked at Pappas, we had a community center there at the school because that's what the kids needed in order to be able to effectively learn. We had a clothing room, we had a food bank, we had a washing machine, we had a shower, we had a medical clinic, we had play therapy. Now, I'm not certainly suggesting that the district provide that, but actually we have a fair amount of vacant space at Coronado, and maybe we bring a nonprofit in, to provide those kinds of services. But in those cases, the school district has to be more, to your point, has to be more of a parent to those students because they're not, in many cases, getting that at home.
So what does that look like? When you say they have to be a parent to those students, what does that look like?
Well, that it's wraparound support. And I believe, again, it's first and foremost telling that student that they have potential, they have strengths, they have the opportunity, and providing. Now, I'm not suggesting that this be teachers because I don't think we can load anything else onto teachers, but I think if we went out and we found a community partnership, let's say, and I know they're working on this they have a wonderful program called the Coronado Promise down at Coronado High School, but to have objective adult advocates to mentor, in essence, we call them coaches, but to mentor young people is incredibly important. On top of that, we have to, and I would say the first priority is, we have to educate them, okay? Before COVID, we had at Coronado only 19% of those students at grade level in English, math, and science. That's just immoral.
It's shocking.
As far as I'm concerned.
It's shocking.
And now, after COVID, it's worse than that.
And that's the lowest. As far as the Scottsdale Unified School District,
that's
Coronado
the
is the lowest.
It's the lowest.
Yeah.
But again, because of my experience at Pappas, I know we can do better than that.
Absolutely.
We can. We must do better than that. But we can do better than that. So I think, it's a community collective. It requires a bunch of stakeholders to participate in that. As I said, it's not just the role of a school or just the role of a teacher, but you have to provide the support system. First of all, basic academics. Let's just say, that child needs to graduate, with a 10th grade level of reading, writing, and math. But for them, it's mostly hope. It's mostly knowing that there's opportunity for them and having a plan and believing in themselves and having other people believe in them.
Kind of goes back to your Dream Roads
it
program,
does.
really.
And I'll give you
it's almost like you need Dream Roads just to be part of the school system. I mean, or a
Well, I certainly think that.
Yeah.
But I'll give you one very personal example. When I worked at Pappas, I was assigned a young second grade African American boy to mentor. And normally they put women with girls and men with boys, but I said I wanted a young boy because I wanted my son to be involved in the relationship. So we were assigned to a young man named Marcus. He was one of 7 children. Dad was in and out of his life. Mom was a drug addict and a prostitute. They lived in transient motels. I just 2 months ago celebrated Marcus's 30th birthday with him. And he graduated from high school. He was so good in math that the high school hired him to teach math at the school he just graduated from. He ultimately went to work for Verizon for 5 years. Now, back to our earlier conversation, he really wants to be a mechanic. So he's in technical school, learning how to be a diesel mechanic. He'll graduate in January, have no trouble getting a job. So he's a success story. Now, I don't take credit for that. You know, a lot of that is his own personal drive and his personal commitment to not live a life that have his children live a different life than he lived. But I like to think that having, you know, one objective, consistent, caring, compassionate adult in his life helped.
Yeah, my daughter is, well, going into second grade now. She's in a Scottsdale school, but it's part of the Paradise Valley School District. And so coming out of kindergarten was COVID year, right? Half the year they were locked out of school. The second half they were trying to get caught up in person and wearing masks the entire year while they were in person. And, so I think the kindergarten teachers were really good, but they kind of misled us as parents and said, they're right where they need to be. Well, the following year, this last year, she's in first grade, and come to find out she's behind in reading and math, which is really frustrating for us because we were like, well, we were told she was caught up, and if we would have known, we would have spent the summer getting her caught up, right? We would have done what we needed to do to make sure she went in. But the reality is she went into first grade, and we found out right away she was behind in reading and math. The school offered, for a good majority of the year, once they found out which kids were at which levels, they started to offer tutoring before school. And I was really impressed with that because what I know of tutoring is always like, okay, as a parent after school, you need to go find a tutor for this kid and you need to pay him X amount of dollars per hour. The school actually offered that. So they took the students that were behind, they brought them into a room before school. Instead of bringing them at 8:45, they started at 8 o'clock. They had a half hour of tutoring twice a week. And by the end of the year, she was caught up in everything. Now, my daughter shouldn't have been behind, in my opinion, because she's a smart child. I know all parents say that, but she really works hard. I mean, she loves reading. She loves writing. She's a studious kid. And so we were, we were shocked that she was behind. But that particular school, I don't know if they all do that in the Paradise Valley School District, but to me, that made all the difference. We've actually even talked this summer about moving her into a different school. She's in Spanish immersion, so there's only so many schools she can go to. And I keep coming back to this tutoring program. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just really, really impressed. Now, there's some things I was frustrated with in regards to COVID, but on the flip side, this tutoring program really caught her up to speed and really where she needed to be the whole time. So I don't know. I look at something like that and think, why can't all schools implement a program like that? Now, look, if you're a parent, you're not going to bring your kid at 8 o'clock. That's on you. You can only do so much as a school district. But to me, if every school had something like that at such an early age that all the kids could participate in, it's almost like it'd be really hard to fail if the parents commit to it and the students commit to it. Now again, you can't make everybody commit. But anyway, I was just curious. It's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about because when you think of, some of the things happening in society today, like, man, at some point this has to start with kids. If the kids don't have hope, like you talked about, if they don't have proper education, now we're doing things, and I don't want to digress on this, but defunding the police in communities that are already in desperate need, right? Communities that now, tell me one community in the world that has high rates of crime that has great schools. None. right? It just doesn't exist. So it just seems like we just continue to move them backwards, and there has to be, to me, Scottsdale Unified of all school districts in Arizona should be leading the way in that. Although, again, you don't have you don't have as much probably disparity in Scottsdale as you might have in certain sections of Phoenix. It could still be a model for other districts.
Absolutely. And I will say, as a governing board member, obviously my responsibility is to all the students in Scottsdale. But I will be honest and say my personal passion has always been with our most under-resourced and at-risk kids.
Yeah.
And education is the key to living a good life in our country. There was a study done several years ago now, it's probably even out of date, that there were 3 things required for a young person not to live in poverty in the United States. If you did these 3 things, you had only an 8% chance of living in poverty. The first one was to graduate from high school, not college, high school. The second one was don't get married until you're 21. And the third one was don't have a baby before you get married. And if you do those 3 things, you are essentially will not live in poverty in our country. So even at Pappas, and I go back to my experience there, as I said, I did all the fun things. We did birthday parties. Every kid should have a birthday gift. We did the Christmas gift giveaway. I chaired a senior prom for 150 homeless kids, which was one of the 5 best nights of my life. But fundamentally, what's going to change their life is education. And as a school district, that is our first and foremost responsibility, is to prepare students that when they graduate, they have the academic and life skills to succeed. Yeah. And I will be honest, that's one of the things that bothers me about Scottsdale is they tout their graduation rates. Oh, we've got a 90%, 95% graduation rate. Pre-COVID, in our 5 high schools, we had only 46% of our kids at grade level.
Yeah.
So I'm not interested in what the graduation rate is.
Right.
I'm interested in how many of those kids graduate with the skills they need to succeed in their next chapter.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk a lot more about the academics because I agree with you. It's the most important thing. So let's I want people to understand what the school board is, what the function is, and why should people care? I mean, there's going to be people that listen or watch this podcast from not just the Scottsdale Unified School District, but from school districts all over the valley or all over the state, right? And so, but a lot of people don't actually understand what the function is, right? In the past, people have gone into elections and they check a box, and maybe we can touch on that in a minute as well. But tell people what the function is, why it's important, and why they should actually care, because they're going to have an opportunity here in the coming months to vote, and this vote's actually going to be quite important.
Very important. So you're absolutely right. Many people do not understand what the role of the governing board is and isn't. So I'll try to give you a little tutorial on that. School boards are made up of elected representatives who are fundamentally responsible to the public for academically preparing students, period. So first and foremost, in terms of what they do, is they have to follow all of the state and federal laws that pertain to education, all right? As I said, improving student achievement is the primary responsibility of the school board. The board sets the district's direction. In other words, they set out the mission, the goals, the policies, overarching direction for what they expect to be achieved in the district. There are certain specific things that the board approves: curriculum, textbooks, The board, for example, has the ability to determine whether or not to close a school, and I guess you would say to build a school, but building a school comes through asking the taxpayers for bonds and overrides.
Sure.
And of course, they're responsible for the budget, overseeing the budget, how the money is spent, et cetera. Probably the biggest misconception of what the board does is the board has very limited control over school funding. Funding generally is a state legislative issue. There's also some federal funding, and of course there are property taxes, which are county-based funding. And one of the big issues of funding is funds often come with a tag as to how they can be spent. And you can't change that. So if you have a surplus in this bucket over here, because it was designated for that bucket, you just can't say, well, we have a surplus here and now we're going to spend it over here. So it's a very convoluted and very restrictive system. What the board does not do, the board does not implement the policies that it makes, okay? That's up to the superintendent. And the board only oversees one person. That is the superintendent. The superintendent, he or she, hires and fires and makes all personnel decisions and is responsible for achieving the goals and the mission that the board sets out. But the board members are not, oftentimes, not experts in pedagogy. A board member doesn't necessarily know how to teach a third grader to read. That's the responsibility of the superintendent and his or her staff, is to understand how to teach the third grader to read.
Okay.
And so the board doesn't run the day-to-day operations of the school.
Okay.
The board is an oversight entity. And finally, as we have learned sadly in the last year, the board does not have the ability to remove a board member who's been an elected board member. That's not something the board can do.
That has to be done by signatures, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Don't you have to have like just a exorbitant amount of signatures to
It has
actually
to be done
do
by
that?
a vote. Yes,
vote.
you have
It
to
is-
have enough
okay.
signatures
And then a vote.
to put an initiative on the ballot, and then the citizens, because it's an elected position. So the best that the board could do in last year's situation was remove the gentleman from being board president, but they don't have the ability to remove him from being a board member because he's elected.
Just so people know that don't actually understand that there was a gentleman, what was his, he was basically the main board member, what president or something of the board?
Well,
Or
at
what?
the time, he was the board president. The board president.
At the time he was. But
the board president is assigned every year.
And he was just, there were some parents upset about COVID and some other things, CRT or whatever happening in the school district, and he took offense and started to spy a little bit on the parents. I know I've had this conversation as well. So just not to go real deep into it, but just so people that are listening understand that, yeah, again, these positions actually do matter. The people that you put in these positions, it's a huge effect. So, okay, so you've talked about some of the things that the board can't do. I think you've also mentioned to me, we had a phone call last week and you mentioned political things, right? Like gun policies and those types of things. Obviously, those are hot button issues that people want to talk about. The people that are running, I know that there's people actively running right now for the Scottsdale board that are talking about those issues, but they really have no control. Is that right?
You're correct. And that's so important for voters to understand. When they're listening to candidates, it's very important for the voter to understand what the board can do and what the board cannot do. I'm going to give you 3 examples that have come up in the last several months. There are some candidates out there saying in their campaign, I will fire the superintendent the first day I'm on the job. No individual board member has the ability to do that. There are 5 board members, and you are 1 vote out of 5. So if people say that, and right now, given all the controversy over parental rights and all of those things, that gets people fired up. Yeah. People need to understand that no one board member has that ability. That's number one. Number two, I was asked, would I take a stand on the Afghan refugees in Scottsdale who were here in the spring of this year? First of all, that's a federal issue. The federal government put them here. And so if you have an issue with that, you need to talk to your U.S. Senator about that.
Right.
As a school board, we have a legal obligation to take refugees, just as we do homeless people, into the school district. So my answer when I was asked about that was, again, we're legally required to take these children, and therefore, when they cross the threshold of one of our schools, we will treat them as we treat everyone else, with love, kindness, compassion, and try to educate them to the best of our ability.
Absolutely.
And then the third thing is, you're right, there are candidates, because school safety, which I'd like to come back to talk about, has risen to the top, at least on my list of issues. Whenever that is brought up, some of the candidates immediately go to, well, we need gun control. And, we very well may not need, people have personal positions on that.
Sure.
But the school board has absolutely no say over gun control legislation.
Okay.
All right. So I think it's important for people to do their research and really understand what a school board member can do and what they can't do.
So while we're on it, instead of coming back to it, what you said you want to come back to the safety issue. What can a school board do? In other words, what is there to talk about as it pertains to the school board?
Well, as we're going to get into, my number one priority in my campaign is academic achievement. However, the number one responsibility of any school board member is to keep our children safe. We had an incident at Arcadia High School on May the 20th where a young man was found to have a gun in his backpack inside the building.
So scary.
Unacceptable. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, some of the programming that we do with our students worked. We have a lot of counseling about see something, say something. So he apparently talked to two friends, then told them that he had this gun in his backpack, and those two people went to the school resource officer and said, hey, so-and-so might have a gun, and that's in fact how he was apprehended. So the programming that we're doing it worked in that situation.
Okay.
But what I find unacceptable is how someone is able to walk into one of our school buildings with a gun in their backpack.
Right.
So there are things that can be done to what they say harden the school itself.
Okay.
Some things we have. We spent money in the last couple of years, and my understanding is that every school now has a double-doored lobby entrance. So you can come into the first door in a lobby, but you can't get into the school itself without being buzzed in by someone.
Okay.
Obviously, we do have school resource officers. They are armed, but we don't have one in every school. We have one in every high school. We have, I believe, a few in a couple of the middle schools.
That means there's somebody always on campus, a
Yes.
resource officer that's armed.
Yes, a trained. I believe most of them are from the Scottsdale Police Department. So that's an option.
Okay.
And I'm going to come back and say I'm not an expert in this, but one of the other concerns is our fencing systems. A lot of our fences are 4 feet high. Their chain link fence, somebody could put a gun through them. There's a playground full of kids right there.
Sure.
So back to the responsibility. Without question, the number one responsibility is to keep our students safe. I don't ever, if I happen to be elected, want to have to sit across from a parent and say, I'm sorry, your child is injured or dead because we didn't do this. So the first thing I would do would be bring in an expert consulting company on how to properly secure for threat assessments. Secondly, big part of that is to include the Scottsdale Police Department in that discussion, et cetera. But identify within reason, okay, obviously within reason. At any point you have to balance cost and, benefit. But identify for each school what needs to be done. And the good news is, in the recent budget that was just passed last week in the state legislature, there's $50 million in there for school safety.
So everything you're talking about right now is inside your purview. Obviously, you can't create gun legislation, but everything that you just described in terms of resource officers and those types of things, those are in your purview in terms of school safety?
What's in our purview as a board member is to direct that issue be addressed. Okay. And again, fundamentally, it's up to the superintendent to be responsible for addressing that, but with the oversight of the board, and work with consultants, work with the police department, present a plan, and find the funding for it. Hopefully, our state right now has a $5 billion budget surplus. Okay, so I would say. And as I said, in the budget that was just passed last week, there's $50 million in there for school resource officers.
Okay, great.
So, the role of the board is to issue the direction, come up with a list of what's needed at each school with a price tag attached to that, and let's figure out where to get the money for that.
How does the superintendent get his position? Is that an elected official, or is that...
It's hired by the board.
Hired by the board. So in theory, you should have synergy with this person.
Yes.
In theory. I mean, there's 5 of you.
Right.
At the end of the day. But hopefully you have synergy so that you're on the same page with how these things are getting implemented.
And that you don't have conflicting objectives.
Right.
You're absolutely right. And that is, okay, so take school safety. The next most important thing that the school board does is hire the right superintendent.
Okay. So people are going to have an opportunity to vote in the coming months, right? There's a big election coming up, and it should be a great turnout because there's a lot of high-profile things on the ballot, right? You have a governor's race, you have a Senate race. I mean, people should turn out for this. Here's the challenge: is school board. You're going to have 6 names, 2 positions, so you have 2 votes out of the 6 names, if I understand correctly. And there are going to be 6 names that for most voters are going to be pretty unfamiliar, right? For most voters. Now, your goal, obviously, is to get your name out there to as many people as you can so that they do recognize your name and they do check that box. But the reality is, for most people, they're not paying attention. And so they're going to go in and vote, and they're going to do one of 3 things. They're going to either leave the whole section blank and not vote. They might check the first 2 boxes because it's convenient. They check the top 2 boxes. Or they may actually have some knowledge of just some basic knowledge. Some people may have extensive knowledge, but they'll have some sort of knowledge one way or the other, and they'll have a couple names to vote for. My question is this: how do you... I mean, my understanding is there's no income for these positions. You're not doing this for the money because there is no money.
There is no money.
Right. And so, throwing hundreds of thousands of your own money or even going out to raise money is a difficult thing, right? You're not running commercials, and I'm assuming probably no signs on the side of the streets and all this stuff, these big marketing budgets that these people have. My question is, how do you what's the plan? What's the strategy? How do you actually get your name out there so people in November, or if they mail in prior, they know your name and they're prepared to vote for you?
It's very difficult. You've hit the nail on the head because it's a matter of generating name awareness. And how do you do that in a city where you're going to have, 50 to 75,000 people vote? So there are opportunities to speak to different groups. There will be, let me just back up and explain the process of how to get on the ballot. So you have to collect 400 valid signatures.
From residents,
From
Scottsdale
residents. And voters.
And vote. Okay.
Registered voters and residents of the Scottsdale School District.
Okay.
Okay. And of course, we've all been advised to turn in twice as many as the required number because you want to avoid somebody challenging your signatures.
Sure.
And our signatures are due by July 12th. At that point, there's 10 days in which people do have an ability to challenge your signatures. But after 10 days, if you're in good standing, you then will be on the ballot. So at that point, a number of groups, once they are certain who's in the race, will have candidate forums, either online, Zoom kind of thing, or in person, which will be great because that gives each of us an opportunity to give an in-depth answer to something as opposed to just a 2-sentence top-line answer.
Yeah.
There's social media is huge. Databases, emails. Again, it's and I hate to use this term because it has a negative connotation sometimes, but it's like a pyramid scheme. It's like, okay, if I send you an email and you forward it to 6 people you know who live in the district and ask them to forward it, et cetera.
Right.
Door to door. Hard to do in the summertime in Arizona, but effective. People may not.
Now, is this you going out and doing it on your own, or do you have a team of people that?
Some of both.
Okay.
Some of both.
Okay.
You can actually hire people to do that for you,
Sure.
but that's not something that appeals to me because you don't really have a quality control way of knowing whether they actually went door to door
Sure.
or they just threw your palm cards in the garbage can.
Yeah.
But I do have what I call Andrea's Army out there, people who know me across the city who are willing to cover 200 houses in their neighborhood.
Nice.
And people have told me that a voter may not remember at all what you had to say, but they will remember that you showed up at their door. So that's an important part of the strategy.
Yeah.
And then there's always the opportunity to do some kind of a mailing. It's expensive. I mean, to mail a postcard to 35,000 people in Scottsdale, you're probably talking about $10,000 or $12,000. And again, how many of those people read it versus just throw it in the garbage can by the mailbox?
Right.
Fun. At the end of the day, there's a ballot statement that comes prior to the election. And again, it's just a matter of, do 3% of the people read that? Do 5% of the people read that? So it's difficult. It's a challenge. And as you say, we don't have the benefit of having an R or a D behind our name.
Right.
Oftentimes, in my case, if I haven't been familiar with a candidate, I at least vote the party.
Yeah, you're right.
And we don't have that benefit either. So
yeah, you're right.
I will say
you're right, because most people will go in and look for an R or a D, and again, it's kind of the lazy way to do it, but that's what happens with most votes. So you're right. You don't even have that. So it's really a crapshoot unless they know names and some policy ideas. Hopefully, even just the names is probably.
And as you said, in this particular election, there are so many up ballot important races. We've got governor, we've got U.S. Senate, which has national implications. We've got attorney general, we've got superintendent of public instruction. We've got that by the time they get to the school board, they may not even get to us. Who knows where we'll be? We might be on the bottom corner on the back.
Yeah.
So it's
in
a
that
challenge.
case, it's just knowing your name and feeling like there's some sort of connection with that name in terms of all the things we've talked about, academic safety and some of the other things we'll talk about as well. So yeah, it is a challenge. So you make a good point, right? There's no R's and there's no D's next to names, but there are some different ideologies inside of the candidates themselves. I think you told me that 4 you would consider quote unquote conservative and 2 you would consider quote unquote liberal, right? So no R's and D's, but there are some ideologies inside of that. What are some of the core differences between the 4, what you would consider conservative candidates running for school board, and then the 2 liberals? I mean, like what's I don't know if anybody's just openly running on CRT as an example. I mean, CRT seems to me like something that's kind of just slipped under the radar, under the parents' radar, and into the school system. And which, by the way, is one of the red flags for me with CRT, is like if you have to sneak something into the school system, then we probably have a red flag here. Then once it gets caught, if you have to deny it, even though we can see it with our own eyes, then again, I mean, you can't tell me that in itself, 2 red flags. There has to be, and then you hear, you hear parents that have actually seen it in action with their kids, have kids coming home questioning things that really shouldn't be questioned as a kindergartner or a first or second, or even, or actually, in my opinion, even as a senior in high school.
Exactly.
This shouldn't
They're
be part of the school
parental
system.
issues.
Right. These moral issues should be dealt with at home. Now, of course, I think the flip side to that is that you do have to enforce things if like bullying, right? Around, if it could be around race or whatever, right? You do have to enforce moral, but I don't know that the schools, I think a lot of the things they're trying to teach in schools really belong at home. That's my personal opinion based on what I've seen. And again, I mean, the red flags for me is like, you just shouldn't have to sneak it in. So with that, what are some of the core differences between, and again, I'm sure there's plenty of core differences just between the 4 conservatives and maybe the 2 liberals, but if you take the 2 groups, what are some of these issues?
Well, I would say that the main issue, and this is a large umbrella, but the main issue is exactly what you said, which is the curriculum as it relates to very sensitive issues. Things like, sexual orientation. How much do you want to talk about people being gay? How, do you talk to kindergartners about the fact that, you can decide to become a man when you grow up?
Right.
Critical race theory. In general, and this is a generalization, the liberal candidates are much more tolerant of exposing our students to many more of those concepts than the conservative candidates are.
So are they actively promoting it? I know there's people running on the platform of anti-CRT, as an example, right? Are they actively promoting it, or is this one of those things you're like, these people, if they get in, they're not going to listen to parents. They don't care about parents' rights. And they're probably going to promote these things. I mean, so is it something that they're active and blatant about, or is it kind of just one of those?
They're pretty straightforward about it.
Are they?
They're
Okay.
pretty straightforward about it. And again, it comes, for me, take something like, first of all, let me just tell you briefly my stance on critical race theory, okay? I firmly believe we should teach American history fully, accurately, completely.
Absolutely agree.
The good, the bad, the ugly, okay?
And by the way, I don't know that there's very many people that actually oppose that.
And now my emphasis would be on all of the progress we have made on those issues. In my lifetime, which is getting to be longer, but in my lifetime, we have gone from having Martin Luther King to a black president. In the history of a country, that's a pretty good amount of progress in a relatively short amount of time. So I'm 100% behind teaching history fully and accurately. Where I absolutely draw the line is pitting one group of people against another, period, based on anything, based on race, based on sex, based on gender, based on the fact that, you like green beans and I like pinto beans. I think that's absolutely out of bounds. So just to have that on record. The other hot button issues fall under these two categories called social emotional learning and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And both of these programs started off with really positive intentions and outcomes. So you take something like social emotional learning and you look at what the original intent and outcomes of those were. Anti-bullying, have a positive self-concept, learn how to read your emotions and react to your emotions. Learn how to read and react to someone else's emotions. All positive things. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, same thing. We should obviously respect all people equally.
Of course.
Nobody should be, hassled or harassed because of their sex, their religion, anything like that. So they all started off with good intentions. But unfortunately now, in many cases, they've slid into, very controversial things. And I will say, I'll be very honest, when I started, my campaign last fall, I wasn't sure how much was actually happening in the Scottsdale School District specifically. Well, I now have on my website a list of Scottsdale Unified School District incidents. Things like promoting to 14-year-olds and above, come to drag queen story hour, okay? Sending home questionnaires. Questionnaire that says right at the top, talk to an adult, but not your parents. Questions like, given the high divorce rate in our country, do you think people should be heterosexual?
This is happening in Scottsdale?
Is happening in Scottsdale. And
now these are so let me clarify. These are questionnaires that are given to the kids that the parents aren't clearly not supposed to know about because they're not even wanting them to talk about these issues with the parents. So it's being given to the kids with obviously with no knowledge of the parents, and I don't know where I'm going with that, but I'm actually shocked because I didn't know that these things are being sent
yes,
to
and
kids.
here's another big issue, which is after-school clubs. Okay, the state has sanctioned the fact that students can form after-school clubs. There's an adult that is there that's present in the room, and so there are student-run clubs that deal with, the Gay Sexual Alliance Club, transgender, this, all of which is fine. I don't have an issue with that.
Right.
As
long as it's choice, it's choice, and it's not being
as long
pushed.
And this is where the difference is.
Yeah.
Right now, the parents are not told what clubs their child is participating in after school. Now, I think these are all minor children.
Yeah.
Okay? So until you turn 18, you're a minor. You're still under the purview of your parent.
Absolutely.
And I think a parent has every right to know if they go to school and say, I would like to know what after-school clubs my child is in. They have a right to know what clubs their child is in. Then they can choose, the parent can choose whether they want their child to continue to participate in that or they don't, or they want to have a conversation about it at home, etc. So to answer your original question, that is the main difference is how prevalent these controversial issues about sex, race, transgender, how prevalent and how transparent they are or are not.
Yeah, and I think you can really just kind of circle that whole thing as parental rights.
Yes.
Right. At the end of the day, the fact that parents are getting circumvented in the entire process of what's happening at schools in certain situations is something that, again, I don't think it's a secret anymore, although I do still think there are plenty of people that either kind of have their head buried in the sand, they just don't care, or they don't know, or whatever the case is. And again, these are important issues in our schools, right? If your child is gay, in my opinion, if your child is gay, you should know that. You should be able to have those conversations. If you're, and going back to critical race theory, I think, one of the things that I think about is how many people on Martin Luther King Day, on a day that we celebrate as a country for progress, one of the most famous quotes is not to judge people by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And everything that I've heard, now, again, from parents that have seen it in action, right? This isn't just hearsay, but it's actually parents that have discovered this, mainly through COVID, because their kids were at home, and all of a sudden they're like, wait, what did the teacher just say on that Zoom call, right? This is how parents actually started to find out about this stuff. Going back to your point of 50 years from now, hopefully COVID advanced the education system. There's some benefits from that. But it's just, it shocks me that we're now at a point in this country where we've actually moved backwards. After the progress that you spoke about, right? 60 years of progress. We're not perfect. We haven't gotten there. Right. We're not perfect, but 60 years of progress. And now we're going to take the words and go backwards. And we're going to say, no, we're not judging people by the content of their character. We're judging people by the color of their skin. And they're doing it with kids as young as kindergarten, which is just shocking. And again, I don't think they should be doing it with seniors. I don't think it should be in the public school system because it's our taxpayer dollars that are funding the system.
Right. And I think, again, also on the conservative side, I think sometimes some of these candidates are going too far, in my opinion. They want to put cameras in the classroom, as an example, okay? That's not something that I personally would support. I might support them in the hallways for a safety issue, but I know that I would not work in an environment where I was filmed all day long and every word I said could possibly get me fired. Plus, given what my son was like in school, I'm pretty sure probably shoved a little girl somewhere along the way, and that would be on camera as well. Sure. But I don't think, and this is kind of where I differ, I don't think you can legislate, and there are a lot of attempts in bills coming through the state legislature to do this, to delineate exactly here's what a teacher can say and here's what a teacher cannot say. I took a course in college once, and the theory, the main theme was you can't legislate morality. So in my view, it's impossible to make a complete list and say, okay, this covers everything it's acceptable for a teacher to say, and here's everything that a teacher cannot say. Back to your earlier point about the superintendent. The superintendent sets the culture of the entire organization. And you just have to have a culture in which teachers are self-moderating, that the teacher knows, okay, I can say this, but, I shouldn't say that. And that's where we've gotten out of whack.
Yeah.
Okay? That we're not enforcing a culture that many parents would like to see. On the other hand, I will say this. There are things that are going to happen in school that you personally may not agree with, okay? It just is what it is. And at that point, then it's up to you.
Such as what? Such as what?
Let me go back to a personal example. When our son was young, everything is age appropriate. Let's just start with that to begin with. But when our son was young, and you certainly know this with young children, there's rap music with just horrific lyrics to them, okay? So for a while there, we would not let him buy a CD that had the M label on it. But eventually, as a parent, you get to the point where you can't shield, this is my parenting philosophy.
Yeah.
You can't shield your child from all the things in the world that you disagree with. You have to teach them how to live in a world in which those things exist.
Yeah, but not necessarily in school.
Well, but if it happens, there's again, it's a matter of how much and how often it's happening. If it happens in school and it's a one-off thing, or it's a particular issue that your
put it in
family,
context.
then you
that's
talk
fair.
to your children and you say, some people feel that way, but that's not the value system that we have in our family.
Yeah,
and ultimately,
I agree that you have to put it in context, and if it's a one-off. So as an example, my son's in preschool, and one of his teachers just recently told him, my son said, well, boys marry girls. And he said, well, yeah, boys can marry boys too. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's being taught across the board. I think it was a one-off. My son's mother said, hey, there is at least one gay couple that brings their child there, right? So I let it go. To this point, I've let it go, and I feel like I was happy with his teachers last year. I don't think it's part of the curriculum. I think it was a one-off conversation. I also felt like it was inappropriate for a preschooler to be corrected that, hey, oh yeah, but this too. It was an add-on. It didn't need to be there. So far, I've let it go to make sure, and I want to make sure that that's not part of a curriculum now that's being taught in a preschool. So that might be an example, and I agree with you. I think you have to put it in context and say, okay, is this something that is predominant, or is this something that just, the reality is that men can marry men now. That is actually a reality. It's just, gosh, it's just really young for me to be confusing these kids with who's marrying who and who's a boy and who's a girl. It just seems really young.
We had a situation in Scottsdale where an after-school teacher, the children who were preschoolers and 5, 6 years old, asked the person if they should call him Mr. or Mrs. And in my opinion, instead of just saying, call me Mia, which is the name that the person uses, she got into a discussion with them about, some girls are boys and some boys are girls. And to your point, the discussion got way beyond. The short answer was call me Mia, period. End of discussion. No more discussion.
Yeah.
So these kids went home and they're now saying to their parents.
Confused.
Yeah. They're like, Mom, when can I become a boy?
Oh.
This is a separate incident. I had a mother of an 8th grade child come to me a couple months ago. Her son came home from school and said, guess what, Mom? Every girl in my class is bisexual. Okay, in 8th grade. All right. So first of all, I want to be clear and say that doesn't all come from the school.
Sure.
Kids get that from social media. They
Fair.
get it from TikTok.
Fair.
Okay, it's not only coming from school.
But none of it should be coming from school. So that's fair. What you just said is fair. Kids are going to learn from other kids, but none of that should be in school. I mean, as far as the educational system.
Right. And here's the other problem of it. So to answer your question, that's the main difference between the conservatives and the liberals. The other problem with it, in my opinion, and it's a huge problem, is that we're spending way too much time on all of that kind of stuff. And therefore, our academic results are in the toilet.
Great segue, because that's what I wanted to ask you next, right? Really great segue, because that was on the tip of my tongue. Is now let's talk full circle academics, right? Because we touched on it earlier. We talked about specifically Coronado High School and the poor results for that particular high school. But my understanding, and it's interesting because, I have a real estate YouTube channel that I actually promote schools. Now, I know that the Arizona school system isn't the best, right? I get that. Good news is we do have some good charter schools and private schools. But, Scottsdale Unified School District, now I don't know about this year or last year, but I know, I think 2020, Scottsdale Unified School District was ranked number 2 as far as school districts in the Phoenix Metro. I believe it was Chandler, Scottsdale, Gilbert, and then Peoria. Now, again, I don't know what 2021 was, but I actually, now with that being said, let's talk about Scottsdale schools, because in my understanding, based on, again, conversations you and I have had, is that the whole system kind of is failing. And so transitioning from parental rights, so we'll just bucket that as parental rights over here, and then transitioning into academics, it seems to me like we can't even get the academics right. Why are we trying to transition into other things and distract from the academics? Because we're failing in the number one core principle that a school, as far as a school standard, the responsibility and the standard.
You're absolutely right. And so I'll just give you a few statistics. I did mention the one of Coronado pre-COVID. At that time, pre-COVID, Desert Mountain High School was our best high school, with a rousing 55% of kids at grade level. Okay? In total in the district, 46% of our students were at grade level pre-COVID. And now, of course, it's down because of COVID.
Yeah.
All right? We just, at that time, I think it was the class of 2020, when they took the ACT exam, only 43% of the students who took the ACT exam met the college readiness benchmark. Okay?
Again, shocking.
Shocking. We just got results 2 weeks ago of the 2022 standardized assessments. 3rd through 8th graders, 40% are not at grade level in English or math. And it goes down. This is what's interesting, and I haven't had the opportunity to dig in depth enough to understand why. We do fairly well in our elementary schools. In our elementary schools, we've got about 73% proficiency. Then we get to middle school, we've got about 56% proficiency. We get to high school, we've got 46% proficiency. So it's going like this. And then to your point, you're going to be shocked when I tell you this. In the spring 2020-21 school year, SUSD now ranked 6th out of 10 in Phoenix metro area districts.
This was what years?
The school year 2021.
Okay.
This data is from the spring of 2021. So basically a year ago.
Right.
A year ago.
Okay.
6th out of 10 in 10th grade math.
Oh, in 10th grade math.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we're not, to your point, the main thing is the main thing. The main thing of the public school system is to educate young people. So when they graduate from high school, these tests only test 10th grade level math. It's Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry. We're not talking about calculus. We're not talking about, differential equations. So we are not educating. Round numbers, 50% of our kids are not at grade level. The other problem with that, and we'll come back and talk about this when we talk about the real estate market and the impact of good schools, et cetera, but we have in the Scottsdale School District only 54% of all the eligible K through 12 children in Scottsdale are in our public schools. The rest of them have left to go to private schools and charter schools.
Yeah.
Academics is a big part of that.
Which, by the way, I will endorse it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of school choice.
So am I.
And fortunately, we do have it because the school system, the public school system, is failing us, right? Is it the worst in the country? No, but look, in my opinion, Scottsdale should be one of the top school districts in the country.
And we should also, if I can just insert, we should also compare ourselves, and this is something that I would do if I was on the board. I would ask for them to identify, pick a number, 6 or 8 comparative school districts around the country. I'm not interested in how we're performing versus the Arizona state results, because they're terrible.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not interested in how we're performing versus national results, which include the city of Chicago, Detroit, New York City. I find that to be irrelevant comparison.
Sure.
I would want to know, let's identify 6 or 8 districts around the country which share our socioeconomic base, our diversity base, our, this, that, the other, and compare ourselves to comparable districts around the country.
Well, again, it's another great segue because that's my next question. Results. As a school board member, now how do we get results? I mean, there are certain things, again, inside of your control. There's certain things that aren't in your control. The first thing that comes to my mind is going to be something that's not in your control. And in my mind, I say, well, are teachers making enough money, right? We know that there was a teacher raise a couple years back. We also know that all that money didn't actually funnel down to the teachers, right? I mean, so one of the challenges with government so many times, I was going to say sometimes, but so many times, is that they create a budget and act like they fix the problem, but then it's not specific enough, so we don't actually know where the money went. So my understanding with that money was it went to the districts, and the districts decided it was funding that was designated for teacher raises. Now, again, this is my understanding. I may be incorrect, but it was funding that went to the districts for teacher raises, and then the districts, though, had the opportunity to decide how that money was dispersed. And so where taxpayers thought teachers got a 20% raise across the board, well, in this district, they got 8%, and in this district, they got 12%, and in this district, they got 5%. So the teachers actually didn't get the raise because the government, in my opinion, did a poor job of actually maybe not designating it, but actually being specific enough to say, we're going to give you the money, but this is how you have to use it. Now, the schools have other needs and all that stuff. So, one of the things in my mind is how do you balance? I think Arizona is an attractive place to live, going back to kind of now bringing real estate into this, right? It's an attractive place to live because we have low taxation, but we also need to make sure that we're effectively using those tax dollars, and the schools has to be one of those areas. Now, again, I know as a school board member, you have absolutely no control of that. My question to you is, what do you have control of? Now, how does Andrea and whoever else is surrounding you on the school board and the superintendent, how do we actually change the culture of this?
The financial culture or the academic culture?
Academic culture.
The academic culture. In my opinion, what we are lacking and the way to change the culture is to set for the superintendent specific, measurable, aggressive academic goals that we expect to be met.
Now, how do we get the follow through on it? So it's one thing to set the goals. It's another thing, do we have the right teachers? Are they getting paid enough? Again, I'm not trying to get outside of your purview with the pay and all this stuff. But it's one thing to set a goal. It's another thing to make sure that the teachers are meeting the standard. How do we get this done?
Well, it's interesting because the district just completed last week a strategic plan. And first of all, it took them 18 months to put a strategic plan together. That's another story. But at the end of it, there's a goal section, okay? I don't think I brought that page with me today, but there are 5 or 6 different goal categories. Even within the academic goal category, they set out about, pick a number, 8 or 10 goals. Not one of them is specific. Every single goal says, increase third grade reading scores, increase graduation rates, increase, no specificity, how much, by when, okay? So the way the board has control over the superintendent is in his performance pay plan, where the board sets out, and they did this last year, they set out, we want this is how they quantified it. We want statistically significant increases in third grade math or reading, in 8th grade math, in ACT scores, etc. Well, it turns out because they just gave the presentation a few weeks ago, that a statistically significant increase is 1 point or less. So he met all of his goals. All right? And here's another stunning thing. I went to a presentation given by the director, the district level director of assessments and accountability. It was all about standardized testing. Gentleman next to me, older man, he actually has grandchildren in the district, asked the woman, do you use standardized testing as a component of, not the only measure, but as a component of teacher evaluations? The answer? No. He said, well, what do you use? She said, we use observation. Okay? So, again, going back to my business days, I had to sell 400 million pounds of margarine a year. All right? I had to go before the chief executive officer and the board of directors of Kraft Foods and explain either I sold more than that or I sold less than that. I better have had a very good reason if I sold less than that, and I probably had another year to improve that, but eventually if I didn't improve that, I would be out of a job. So what I think is lacking, severely lacking, is we are not setting specific, aggressive, measurable academic goals that we expect to be met.
So give me an example. And I'm not asking you to create policy right now or create goals here, but give me an example of something that could be created as something that's specific, measurable, attainable, and that would actually make an impact. Like what might that look like?
Well, again, I'm not an expert in pedagogy. I'm a management expert, but here's how I would approach it, okay? There have to be, between pre-kindergarten and 12th grade, I don't know what the number is, but this is the question I would ask. What do we know are the 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever the number is, critical milestones that we need to achieve so that we graduate a student at grade level? One of them in Arizona is learning to speak English. We all know reading at 3rd grade level. By 3rd grade, you have to read. We all know 8th grade, you have to be doing 8th grade level math. I don't know, maybe there are more along the way. So I would say, first of all, identify what those critical components are, and then what are we, where do we stand now? Okay, you're not going to take a 40% rate and turn it, into a 20% rate overnight. But let's set collectively, it's a collective process, but let's set a specific, aggressive, measurable goal.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not going to say it's, to make just increase something over time. You have to, it just happened. You make a 1% improvement, you're going to say that you've succeeded and you get a bonus for that?
In my mind, I know this is unrealistic, but in my mind, in my logical mind, I can't fathom why you wouldn't get 100% success rate. Earlier I outlined what was done for my daughter to get her caught up to speed, along with her fellow students, right? And it was a great program. I was really, really impressed with that program to a point where I'm like, I don't know that I want to pull her out of the school for the other one that we originally wanted her to be in strictly because of that tutoring program. Now again, I'll just say it. I don't see why you can't have 100% success rate. Of 3rd graders reading at 3rd grade level, there has to be a system, whether it's a tutoring system like that or whatever it looks like, there has to be a way I can't fathom why we can't get and again, I know it's unrealistic. I know that there's probably not a school district in the country doing it. I can't wrap my head around why we can't get
the one
very
exception,
close to 100% rate on that.
The one exception you have to make and you have to allot for are the special ed students.
Well, sure.
And how many of them are severely unable to do that?
But taking that out of the equation,
need just additional assistance.
Taking that out of the equation,
right. But I agree with you, and I agree with you on, my view is this. It's my responsibility as a governing board member, as I said, to graduate students that are fully prepared to succeed in their next chapter. If it takes a student 13 years to do that, if it takes a student 14 years to do that, I'm fine with that, okay? Because I think we're failing them if we graduate them and they're ill prepared for their next chapter. So, to your point, if you have a third grade student, there are lots of different interventions. Again, I'm not an expert in pedagogy, but there are lots of interventions. Some might be, having, like your daughter, tutoring twice a week. Some might be having tutoring every day. Maybe there's an extreme situation where those children are taken out of the classroom and for 6 months they're in another classroom and all they do is learn to read. I don't know the mechanics of it.
Sure.
But I completely agree that we can do way better than we're doing, and we must, and it's our responsibility, and it's the board's responsibility to set the framework and expectations for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the question of why is this election so important and why are the school board members so important to the whole equation? I mean, if you're talking kind of the hierarchy again, I mean, it really there's two layers that we've talked about. The school board members holding the superintendent responsible for results. And if you don't have the right school board members setting the right goals, the right achievement goals, and all the other things that go along with that, then you're probably not going to have the right superintendent. And it sounds like most of this really at the end of the day comes down to is the superintendent. I mean, again, you have to have the right board members, but the superintendent, it sounds like is way more important than what I actually envisioned.
Let me make a comment about having the right board members, okay? I strongly believe that we need large-scale management expertise on the board. That has been the lack of that is one of the reasons we're underperforming the way we are. This is, as I said earlier, a $500 million operation. We're not in it to make money, but the same principles apply. And, the best teams are made up of people that bring different perspectives and different expertise. I'm not suggesting that, all 5 people need to have, run $200 million businesses. But the fact that we have no one on the board who has run a large-scale enterprise and been responsible for setting and achieving goals is an issue.
So let's segue, because that's my next question. Or actually not my next question, but just I want to give you an open platform right now to make your case to the voters, right? What is... And you started to talk about it, so that's why I didn't mean to cut you off, but I know that is part of this conversation, right? So if I'm a voter listening to this right now, I live in the Scottsdale Unified School. I live in Scottsdale. I can vote in this election. Why do I vote for Andrea as opposed to the other 5? And by the way, again, there's 2, so you can vote for 2, but
right.
Why are you one of those 2?
Because I am uniquely qualified to be in this job. I am, and obviously I'm a little prejudiced when I say this, but I am the most qualified person to be in this job of any candidate running by a country mile. As I said, I have run $200 million businesses. I have written the strategic plan for those businesses. Not only did I write the plan, but I then was responsible for executing it and accountable for those results. All right? So, that's a perspective. The job, and here's an important point, even when we go back to parental rights, and believe me, I fully support the things we've talked about in parental rights and transparency. But you have to understand that is probably, I don't know, I haven't been in the job, but I'm guessing 20% of the total job of a governing board member. As we talked about at the beginning, you have to have somebody who can understand in-depth financial statements. You have to have somebody, we have 10 school buildings right now in our district that are either empty or substantially underutilized. Somebody has to make real estate decisions in the upcoming board. Are we going to close schools? Are we going to consolidate schools? Are we going to bring a nonprofit in? Are we going to bring a branch of EVIT in? So there are so many skill sets involved in being a governing board member. You really need somebody who has a large set of skills.
Yeah.
Secondly, as we talked about in the beginning, I've spent 25 years substantively in education. So I have both sides of that coin. And that, I think, is my unique proposition. The other thing I would say, and this often comes up, is 85% of the households in Scottsdale do not have K through 12 age children. However, all of them are paying property taxes for the schools. All of them have a vested interest in the fact that if we have good schools, the house that they live in is worth more.
Sure.
And I believe they deserve a voice on the board. There are a lot of people out there saying you have to be a parent of a kid in the district in order to serve on the board.
Well, not only a voice on the board, but it's a really good case for why they should turn out and vote as well.
Exactly. Because, first of all, I don't want to look at it as from only a monetary standpoint, because I think all of us adults have a moral obligation to the youth in our community to best prepare them to succeed in life, regardless of any financial interest. But if you want to be practical about it, as you said, we're all paying property taxes, and we're being asked for bonds and overrides. And we deserve a good return on our investment. We deserve an efficient and effective use of those funds, as you said. How much of that money goes to overhead versus how much of it actually goes to, in classroom teaching. So I think the best teams are made up of people with a variety of expertise and perspectives. And people who are parents who have kids in the district, they have one perspective. They see the homework that comes home. They hear their kids come home and say, "Hey, Mom, when am I going to turn into a dad?" So that's a valuable perspective. And that's why I would encourage people, as you said, there are two positions. I would encourage people to vote for two complementary candidates, not two duplicative candidates, to get two varying perspectives, two different kinds of expertise.
Skill sets. Sure.
Two different skill sets.
Sure.
But it does concern me that we don't have somebody on the board with large-scale management expertise.
Yeah.
And also, as I said, I bring both sides of that equation. I understand how to run a big business. I've been, passionately involved in education for 25 years in substantive ways. So I think in that regard, I'm the most qualified candidate in the race.
Here's my last question.
Yes.
There's no money in this. They're not paying you. If you get voted in November, there's no incentive, monetary incentive. Why? Why would you put yourself through this? The signatures, the race, and then it sounds like a full-time job to me. Like I could never, as much as it sounds compelling for me to say, hey, the school board, like I want to make an impact, I could never do it. It sounds like a full-time job to me. Why are you doing this?
Because fundamentally, I am passionate about seeing every young person maximize their potential. That's what drives me to get up in the morning. That's what motivates me. That's what I've done for the last 25 years. And I'm saddened by the fact that we're not living up to that in Scottsdale. And my motivation is one and only focused on improving results for our students. I have no political aspirations. I'm not going to run for the state legislature after this. Is not a stepping stone for me to do anything. But it's my purpose in life. And that's what it comes down to.
If people want more information, how do they get it? Where do they find you? Online. Online, social, whether it's websites, social media, wherever you want to promote.
Okay, online, the Facebook address is Vote Andrea SUSD.
.com.
No, that's Facebook.
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's
Facebook.
Facebook.
Sorry. Go ahead.
And to your point, the website.
So I'm sorry, I cut you off there. So I want to make sure people got that. So Facebook, Vote Andrea SUSD. Mm-hmm. Got it.
And the website is voteandreasusd.com.
See, I was right.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And there's a way on the website for two things. First of all, for people to sign up for updates.
Okay.
So they can receive emails from me about current issues. There's going to be something coming out about the strategic plan. So sign up for updates. And there's also a way, if you have a question for me, that you can submit a question. And actually, there's a way you can do that in two forms. One is if you want to identify yourself, there's an avenue for you to do that and put in your name and phone number and address, and I'll call you back or I'll write you back. But there's also a way, if you want to, there are some people in the district, for example, maybe there are teachers in the district who who want to ask a question but don't necessarily want to be identified. So there's a way to also reach out anonymously.
Yeah. Andrea Keck, best of luck in the upcoming November's right around the corner. It's right there. Hopefully people get out and vote. And again, I think it's on their radar now. I don't think the school board is a mystery to people anymore. I think it's on their radar, and I would encourage people to get familiar with the names, but certainly your pedigree is impressive, and so best of luck to you in November.
Well, thank you, Todd, for this opportunity. As I said, it's important for people to be informed. And in order to be informed, it's important for you to give people like me, candidates, an opportunity to really get in depth in discussing an issue. Because when you listen to somebody's campaign speech somewhere, to a certain extent, everything sounds the same. Everybody makes the same 5 or 6 points. And so it's really hard to dig down and understand what the differences are. So I very much appreciate the opportunity and the length of time and your support.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this show, remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and share this interview. You never know when you might change a life. If you'd like to get involved in the conversation, you can watch this full podcast episode in our Interviews with Arizonans YouTube channel and engage by liking, sharing, asking questions, and commenting on this or any other interview on YouTube. Thanks for listening to Interviews with Arizonans. Remember, keep asking questions until you get the real answers. We'll see you next time.